I'm Mike Uyak. I love to try new things, and I've had culinary adventures all around the world as well as right at home. I've had really wonderful food, as well as some really horrible food. I'd like to share some of my adventures with you, and we'll see if I have what it takes to fix whatever goes wrong. This is Recipe Redemption. Hello everyone, Happy New Year, and welcome to the first episode of Recipe Redemption for 2021. So, 2020, am I right? We need to get back to basics and cook some really weird food. I wanted to take a moment to consider this recipe that I found on the internet, which appears to be from a Lutheran church cookbook from somewhere in eastern Canada for a hot dish known as African chow mein. My first gut reaction was to dismiss this offhand, but I decided to pick apart the recipe a little bit and see what I'd find. And it didn't help. Celery, onion, and ground beef are browned, then combined with mushroom soup, whether this is some form of brothy mushroom soup no longer produced or if this refers to cream of mushroom soup, I'm not entirely sure. Though other recipes I have since found for this questionable potluck item call for cream soups specifically and not always mushroom. Um, Recipe calls for uncooked rice, water, soy sauce, and molasses, and the whole thing is baked. So then I got even angrier than before. There's nothing specifically African in this dish as far as the ingredients are concerned or the preparation, and there aren't any fried noodles, which chow mein requires by definition. Again, I was about to dismiss it, but I figured I'd do just a little more research, and boy howdy, there are a lot of recipes for this glop. Somebody loved this stuff, and there's a reason. It's an actual thing. See, as it turns out, there were several Chinatowns that sprung up in Africa as Chinese immigrants arrived to work in the gold mines in South Africa and the Transvaal and the railways of Madagascar between the 1890s, early 1900s. And as immigrants are wont to do, they brought their food with them. So at some point, there was a version of chow mein being cooked in Africa and probably made use of more locally available ingredients. So maybe the noodles weren't easy to come by, and it was easier to serve chow mein with a different starch like rice, or possibly a sticky porridge like mealie pop. At some point, some folks then migrated from Africa to the US, bringing this African version of chow mein with them, distinct and separate from the Americanized version of chow mein that was then being served at the Chinese restaurants popping up all over the country. And this African chow mein became an easy, bakeable dish for dinner parties and church basement socials that didn't depend on unfamiliar ethnic ingredients like actual chow mein noodles, which up until the late 1970s you couldn't even get in a standard American grocery store. Even that exotic Far Eastern delicacy top ramen wasn't introduced in the US until 1972. So, we're doing this. This is actually one of the least involved versions of this recipe I have since found on the interwebs. Some call for both mushroom soup as well as cream of celery soup or cream of chicken, packets of onion soup mix, and one even called for a cup of toasted almonds for some reason. Since this is possibly a beloved dish from a simpler time in people's lives, I'm going to stick with this recipe, not adulterated in any way, and just see what we think of it. Again, going to reduce the proportion so I only make one serving because it sounds doubtful, but we'll see. Okay, so just like the recipe says, I am browning some ground beef here. And as soon as that sort of cooks through most of the way, I'm going to add my
chopped celery and chopped onion. And just cook those for 4 or 5 minutes until they're starting to caramelize a little bit. And then I'm placing in this oven-proof bowl with some uncooked rice, sprinkle of salt, good glug, probably about a tablespoon of soy sauce, and a quarter can, this is a quarter recipe, so a quarter can of cream of mushroom soup. It's about a quarter can. And don't worry, I'm planning on using the rest of that cream of mushroom soup on a different video, so waste not, want not. And I have a three-quarters of a cup of hot water here, and I'm trying to use a quarter of a teaspoon of molasses. I didn't bother trying to measure that, just a drop. Stir this all together, and then I'm going to cover this with foil and place in a 350-degree oven for an hour. The foil is there to help reduce moisture loss while baking. And after an hour, foil comes off, and this is what we're left with. Much the same as when it went in, but it's a little thicker.
Well, it's thickened up. Obviously, the rice has absorbed a lot of moisture. Smells a little better. Let's just see how the African chow mein tastes. This just came out of the oven, so give me a moment. It's significantly better than I expected, based on the recipe. It is still pretty bland. Uh, the mushroom soup definitely helps, adds richness, little extra umami, along with the soy sauce. Um, Definitely adds that umami. Um, I don't really know the molasses did anything. Uh, it's not really detectable. That may be the point. Um, I know it has a little bit of, in addition to the sweetness of just it being a sugar product, there is also sort of a bitterness to it that may be contributing to this, and just, it's a background note that you don't really notice because it's not actually sweet. The other flavors do kind of help to bring some of that beefiness out. So, so as a sort of a stroganoff, it's not bad. I would actually, instead of rice, I would actually serve this over egg noodles or something, and just call it a stroganoff. Um, Maybe make it a little bit thicker, but it's reasonably thick. Um, it's thickened up, and so it's got a nice kind of gravy to it. So it's not bad. Um, Church basement social type stuff, sure. This is something you could bring to a potluck. As a dish, it's fine. It still kind of bugs me though, because again, nothing about this is African. At least not specifically African. There are ingredients that are eaten in Africa, but they're also eaten everywhere else in the world. Uh, and the flavors aren't African. And I don't have to have anything specifically really exotic, but there needs to be something that kind of pushes it in that African direction. And also, again, It's not chow mein. 'Cause chow mein, by definition, if you look up what chow mein is, you have to have chow mein noodles. You have to have fried noodles. So calling this African chow mein is a little annoying. It's a misnomer if nothing else. It's just something that came up, that developed over time, um, as sort of an Africanization and then an Americanization of a Chinese dish based on the ingredients that you had available and the changes that people made to the original recipe over time. But I kind of want African chow mein. So, what can we do? Well, spices, first of all. This isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it needs something. Uh, so there are lots of different spice mixes that can sort of nudge the flavors in an African direction. A lot of them, things like harissa and ras al hanout, are sort of northern African, and they're heavily influenced by sort of southern Europe and Arabic flavors, because they're sort of the crossroads for those. That's not really the direction I want. Something that's more African, if there is such a thing. So going a little further south, there's Berbera. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. From Ethiopia. I think that will be a good start. Um, then, as far as vegetables, there are vegetables that are cultivated and eaten almost exclusively in Africa, um, but as a result, they're kind of hard to get a hold of. So we're going to go as close as we can. First, being okra, which originally comes from either Ethiopia or on the other side of the continent, and on the eastern or on the western side rather, Chad, Niger area, depending on who you ask. Okra is definitely an African vegetable. Originally came from there. There are some African versions, or excuse me, varieties of eggplant. Hard to get a hold of. They're little round, sort of hand grenade size uh, eggplants. That they're striped purple and white, and they're actually quite pretty. I've seen them occasionally, but I'm not going to go out on a special foray to look for them here in Seattle, because um, they're probably in some specialty markets, and it's just, we're still in the middle of lockdown as I film this right now, so it's kind of discouraged to go out a whole lot. And besides, I'm lazy, so I'm going to use probably a Japanese eggplant. It'll be good enough. It's eggplant. And then greens. Greens are also used in a lot of African cooking, and a lot of ones that we don't typically see in our American megamarts. Things like amaranth leaves, sweet potato leaves. There is actually an African nightshade. That whole idea gives me the creeps, but there's an African nightshade where the greens are eaten and they don't kill you. Uh, um, those are pretty exotic. I'm going to use kale. Uh, there are varieties of brassicas that are eaten in Africa, and so kale is a kissing cousin. It's going to be as close as I'm going to get. But I think with additional spicing, specifically African spicing, African-ish vegetables added into the dish, and the actual use of chow mein noodles, I think will push this into more the realm of what at least I think an African chow mein should taste like. So let's get cooking. Let's see what we can come up with.
Okay, just like before, browning some ground beef along with some onions and celery. I'm making this for dinner, so I'm making a larger batch this time. And just like before, adding plenty of soy sauce, probably about 3 tablespoons for this full recipe, along with our berbera spice. And I'm using probably about a quarter cup of this. It depends on how you made the spice and how spicy you like it. I could have probably actually used more. Once that's simmered for a little bit, I can then add my eggplant. Probably about half a pound. And I'm in Seattle, so okra pretty much, especially this time of year, it's only available frozen. But there you go, I thawed it out, and in it goes along with the kale. And yes, it's pre-chopped kale. Did I mention I'm lazy? So, going to stew that together until the kale wilts and everything is incorporated, and then I'm adding my rinsed chow mein noodles. And pro tip, make sure that ahead of time you actually have a wok that's going to hold all the ingredients. This got to be a challenge to stir, but stir it I did for probably another 10 minutes over medium heat until it got good and saucy and everything was cooked through.
Okay, pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. Definitely needs more salt than I used, or more soy sauce perhaps. More of the spice. I was afraid of going too far, and it was actually, it ended up being a lot more subtle than I thought it was going to. So, more of that spice mix, maybe a little bit more heat even. I was also afraid of going too far with the chili peppers, and it wasn't really spicy at all. I probably could have gone a little further with that. But with the chow mein noodles and a little bit more oil, definitely we're definitely onto something as far as redeeming. I don't know that the original African chow mein recipe needed redeeming. It is its own very distinct thing, but it offended my sensibilities because it's not really chow mein and it's not really African. So we made it pretty good strides in that direction. Probably needs a little bit more tweaking, but hey, I'm just making stuff up here. So, what do you think about African chow mein? Have you ever had it in its original form, in this form, as opposed to the actual chow mein that I just made? What did you think of it? What have you done with it, if anything? Leave a comment down below. And if you have any other ideas, feel free to also post those down below as well for things that I might try in the future. So, until next time, I'd like to thank you for watching. I'm Mike Uyak, and we'll see you next time here on Recipe Redemption.